Hello, everyone, and welcome back. It's been a couple of weeks, but you're back with the Virginia Democratic Small Business Caucus Show live, and we're happy to have you back on July the 19th. We've been out of pocket here for about 3 weeks, spent a little time in Ghana, a little small business over there, and also a little bit of vacation. Hey, it is summertime. How y'all enjoying that heat? Oh, it's warm. It's warm. But we got business to take care of. We've got the same old things we're still fighting. And I'm happy to see that you're back. And I just want to welcome you. As we do, we always start with a little bit of Bob Marley. Could you be loved? For all you small business owners, soon to be small business owners, supporters of Democratic small business owners, everyone that's out there, I just want to welcome you back and let you know there's a lot of things that are important, that we still need to take care of. I'm going to point down a little bit, let you see the voting rights shirt. I keep wearing it, and here I am. Bob's off, but man, we're back again. I am so happy to see you. We're not a polished, clean, shiny show. We just work from my den in my library, and I talk to people about small business opportunities, but more importantly, until we get it resolved, get voting rights back on the books for all Americans, because the impact is huge. It is fundamental to our democracy. So I'm going to start off talking about a little bit of that. But before I do, I just want to say, hey, it's good to see you. Glad to have you back. Also trying to get my technology straight as I look around my room here and say, uh-oh, there's something I'm missing. Let me get it back here. I want to make sure we got a great guest who's been with us before. Fantastic gentleman, and he's got a lot of great stuff that he's been doing. We want to make sure we are able to bring him on at the appropriate time. Give it about another 15 minutes or so. As soon as I go through this spiel, the most important spiel there is, voting rights, the things that keeps our democracy running, the things that keeps our families safe, the thing that keeps us talking to each other and making sure we're resolving serious concerns for small business, for people's lives, and for voting here in this country. This young democracy we have, a little older than 200 and some years. But you know what? We've been getting some things done in that time. But I want to ask you first, COVID has not gone away. You still see people running around in certain places and businesses. They're still required to wear masks. But even when I traveled, when I was traveling to Ghana on the plane, some people had on masks, some people didn't. Some of the stewards had, matter of fact, some of them wore masks, some of them didn't. But I think that is probably an attribute and a positive attribution to give to everyone who worked together to make sure that we put a handle on those things here in the United States, particularly with the Biden administration and how they were able to get everyone tested, how they were able to make sure that they work with everyone. And there was a whole lot of fracas going on about that. I don't care what side of the fence you were on. Didn't really matter. Some people felt one way, some people felt the other, but we worked it out. We worked it out. We got at least a third of the 2/3 of the population, or at least more than 2/3, if I'm remembering my statistics. People who wanted to get vaccinated got vaccinated. People who needed to get boosters got boosters. People who didn't want to get vaccinated, they didn't. And more importantly, with the American Rescue Plan, the Democrats did what they need to do to help get small business and large business back on its feet. Whether or not you were a small business, whether or not you were an individual, the Democratic Party worked with the American public. They worked with you, whether or not you had a D by your name or an R by your name. We knew that it takes bringing everyone together to make this country work. And that's the most important thing. Giving everybody what they need, making sure everybody's healthy, making sure people are surviving so they can go out there and do what they need to do for their families, run their businesses, and basically just run this government on a local, a state, and a federal level. We got it done. A lot of people thought we couldn't. We did. I'm still thinking about that miracle in Philly. This guy got that highway back open in record time. People said that highway was going to be closed for months. Man, we can get some stuff to get done when we work together. So just remember that. Working together pays, giving everyone an opportunity page. It doesn't matter where you're from, who you love, you know, what gender you are, what race you are. We're all Americans. We're trying to get things done so everybody can live a good life here and abroad and help other countries to succeed too, because it takes allies. So I'm just happy to be back. I don't know whether or not you guys can tell my voice is a little hoarse, but I'm just happy. I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to see that I can get back and talk about these things, because one of the things that still has not been resolved, and I'm still going to stay on it until it gets resolved. You folks know what it is. It's voting rights. Voting rights has got to happen. We got to get that. It's the foundation of our democracy. We don't get that right, we're in big trouble. You know, there's a lot of things going on. And you know, I don't want to be like the big channels. I'm looking at my various different screens here because I'm trying to find my mouse. Okay, I found my mouse. I'm trying to figure out where it is. Anyways, here it is. And just talk about the issues of the day. But my one issue of the day is the issue of every day, and the issue until it gets resolved is voting rights for all Americans, the unobstructed access to the voting ballot, with nothing getting in your way. So that's one of the things that I want to make sure that we do. I'm definitely a big supporter of what? Voting rights. But before we talk about voting rights, let's talk about some of the stuff that's going on just around the country that we're trying to get resolved. It was just kind of, you know, I said I wasn't going to do this. So I'm going to stand down for a second on this, because I believe in talking about voting rights and talking about small business. It kind of, voting rights covers everything. You can name your issue. It doesn't really matter what it is. You know, it can be small business issues, access to capital. It could be police reform. You know, it could be like the George Floyd bill. It could be student loans and student debt. What are we going to do about that? It could be women's right to privacy and healthcare. You can go on and name any particular issue you want to name. How do we get that resolved? Ultimately, it gets down to the vote. It gets down to who you're going to put in local, state, and federal office that are going to carry out the sort of things that the majority of people in this country want to see happen. And all that starts with the vote. How do I get into local office? Voting. How do I get into state office? To vote. How do I get into federal office? To vote. How do judges get into office on the state level? To vote. How do judges get appointed? By people we elect. Supreme Court judges on down. They're basically appointed by people we elect to office. Depending upon the officers where they're appointing these various different judges. And, you know, I'm not even going to go through all of the considerations we're having now with SCOTUS and the rest of these things. But I can tell you one thing, one way to get them resolved for sure. It's an easy way to get some of it resolved anyway. When it comes time to vote. And that is why getting unfettered access to the vote is extremely important. So, you know, I just want to thank folks who get out there doing what they need to do to support the country and get that done. So let me go ahead and start with my first thing on voting rights I always talk about, right? So I'm going to go first. There's the triumphant, what I call it, the basis of all of our civil rights, coming from the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and the 1968 Fair Housing Act. And I'm going to go through them quickly, give you a quick status. It was in the news, by the way, today, and I'll wait to talk about that. But let me just start out with the first one. I don't know. I hope I see my internet signal is jumping. I certainly hope people can see me and hear me. But anyway, we're going to move right ahead. Let's talk about that first thing, right? The Civil Rights Act of 1964. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 basically said it prohibited the discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. Provisions in this civil rights bill forbade discrimination on the basis of sex as well as in hiring, and race as well as in hiring, promoting, and firing. So basically, any sort of discrimination based on sex, color, religion, race, national origin, it prohibited that. And it also prohibited even that when it came to hiring, promoting, and firing. So you're kind of figuring, well, hey, I guess the 14th Amendment did this. Well, apparently the 14th Amendment wasn't good enough because we needed to pass this bill in 1964. I won't get into all the reasons why we needed to pass it in 1964, but I will tell you this. We had to get that done in 64 because Jim Crow, before that, and before Jim Crow, we had the whole thing with the post-Reconstruction stuff we went through. And before that, we had the Civil War. Couldn't get it right. And before that, you had slavery. Listen, we finally have gotten ourselves to a point where we said, hold on, if you're born in this country, I don't care what race you are, I don't care what religion you are, I don't care what gender you are, you all have these basic civil rights. Boom, in the story. And you still have people who will not agree with that. They want you to do what they say. They don't want to give you those rights that you have earned as an American. Americans have fought for in many battles here in this country and overseas to affirm the right that you can live a life free and take care of your family and have a pursuit of happiness and a pursuit of freedom, a pursuit of whatever it is that you want to do, as long as you're not hurting anyone else or doing things that are illegal. So the Civil Rights Act was that first leg on that three-leg stool. The second one is 1965, and this is really a big deal. And by the way, folks, I'm gonna let you know they're trying to come after your civil rights. They're trying to basically say next, if you keep listening, that if you were born in this country, somehow they're saying, well, maybe you don't deserve civil rights. Maybe even if you were born here, you shouldn't have those rights. They're already talking about that. Stay tuned. Make sure you're paying attention. Make sure you're voting. Okay, let's go to 1965. Let me tell you about 1965, right? And that is the Voting Rights Act of 1965. We'll talk about this because it was a huge thing when it happened in the 60s, and President Lyndon B. Johnson signed it into law and basically outlawed discriminatory voting practices that had been adopted in many southern states and also in some states that weren't in the South. Things like literacy tests or as a prerequisite to voting, or basically anything that had any sort of way to suppress the votes, from outright killing people to burning their houses, to making them count jelly beans, guess how many jelly beans are in a jar, to making them quote the Constitution, to what do they do nowadays? Well, they move all the voting centers away from you where they're not near you. So you have to travel an unreasonable amount of time and distance in order to vote. Or they shorten the number of days that you can actually do early voting, or they get rid of mail-in voting. There's so many different ways to suppress the vote. It only has to do with how creative you actually want to be with reference to the law. That's why that law, we had laws with this in the 1965 Voting Rights Act that had something that prevented people from doing that. We're going to talk about that, okay? And the last one I'm going to talk about real quick is the Fair Housing Act of 1968. And the Fair Housing Act of 1968, basically same thing, no discrimination for people who were trying to sell, rent, finance housing, nothing. You couldn't do it based on their race, their religion, national origin, handicap, or the type of family status, whether you were single or whether or not your family was an LGBTQ family now or whatever. People would just do all kind of discriminatory practices if they didn't like any particular thing about you. Well, the Fair Housing Act of 1968 outlawed that sort of behavior. So these are really the basis of most of all of our modern civil rights we have in this country, for women, for African Americans, for people when they're in court. That goes back to the your Miranda rights and things of that nature. All of these things are sort of based off of your basic civil rights that you have in this country. Well, let me sort of tell you what happened, though. We had some problems with this, right? So in 1960 and in 2013, Supreme Court saw fit to removed the Voting Rights Act. And I'll tell you a little bit about that. The John Lewis Voting Rights Act is H.R. 4, happened in the 116th contract. And what this bill does is it puts back into the voting rights in this country what's known as pre-clearance, meaning before the Supreme Court got rid of it, or SCOTUS, in 2013, anyone who was trying to make any changes to voting practices, it had to go through what is known as pre-clearance. And pre-clearance simply meant that before any changes that could be made to any voting laws, it went through the Department of Justice and the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice, and particularly states that had been offensive, had been basically doing illegal voter suppression activities. And they specifically had, I guess for lack of a better term, a watch on them until the records proved that they had changed their ways. And the Supreme Court thought in 2013, but hey, you know, we had an African-American president, and you know, there's no more racism or voter suppression that happens in this country. So we'll just get rid of that pre-clearance piece. And as soon as they got rid of that pre-clearance piece, you immediately had states immediately revert back to their voter suppression techniques of Jim Crow and everything else that they used to do prior to 1965 in the passage of the Voting Rights Act. We need to put that back into place. And what puts that back into place? The House of Representatives put it as the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. Why do they call it John Lewis? Because here's John Lewis, wrong thing. Here's John Lewis right here. Excuse me. Here's John Lewis. I'll get it right in a second. Here's John Lewis to your right over here, walking across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, where he got his head busted in and almost killed, along with, I think, another pastor in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Hosea Williams, I believe his name was, as they simply tried to march for voting rights. Voting rights are the foundation of a democracy. If you cannot vote, then you cannot put people in office, local, state, or federal level that represent your views. That is the reason why our opposition to democratic rights in this country, mostly coming from the Republicans, be very specific about it, don't want to see that happen, because people are voting. And when they do vote, they're making a decision which is contrary to what it is that they would like to see done. But you know what? This is our country. This is our Constitution. This is the reason why you have to have these rights. All right. Okay. So you got H.R. 4. Then, of course, there was H.R. 1 and the For the People Act, which basically did the same sort of thing, that even expanded voting rights even more so. I'm not going to go through all the different pieces that are in this bill in 2021, but the For the People Act just basically expanded voting rights even more so. It made it very easy for Americans to vote, moving all these sort of things out of their way. Passed in the House, but did not pass in the Senate. So in order for us to get these two bills and other laws passed, we need to make sure we elect enough of Democratic senators, or senators who aren't Democratic, but senators that are allies, that are going to recognize the fact that all Americans, regardless of their stripe, whether they're Republican, a Democrat, or an independent, they have a right to cast their vote for what they believe in. And states do not have the right to make it more difficult for them to vote. Stop. Full stop. No more. That is it. That is what should be happening. That is what was happening until the Supreme Court, or SCOTUS, changed the law precedent after more than 50 years. But here we are now, going back through this whole thing again, that our parents and our elders and our ancestors went through to get us to a certain point. Let me trust and believe that there's people out there who do not have your best interests at heart. I think they just want to see people not be able to be all they can be, because when we have fair opportunities for everyone, this is when the country does well. This is when business does well. Everything does well when people have those opportunities. So what can you do? What is the call to action? The call to action is, guess what? Call your congressperson. There is an app out there called 5 Calls, and it works on an Android and it works on a Mac. That means an iPhone or either a Google phone. You download this free app. It basically calls your senator or your congressman or whoever it is based on the issue. It's a really easy app to use. Takes all the confusion out the way. Download it. Put your information in. Brings up exactly voting rights, whatever it is that you want to do. It shows you who all of your contacts are, local, state, federal, and it has the number, and all you got to do is push the button and dial. And you just talk to your congressman, or you talk to your local representative or your state representative and say, hey, we're familiar with HR 1, we're familiar with HR 4, we want voting rights passed, or whatever it is that you want done. But in this case, we know that it's out there. We want you to vote for it so the president can sign it. We need to make sure that President Biden can put his signature on that legislation and put protection of our voting rights back into place. It's that simple. There's your call to action. And like I said, it's available on Google. You can get it there. There's the link. You want to go to it. You can also get it on your iPhone. There it is. There's the link right there. Basically, I'm just showing you pictures, but listen, it's easy to do. It's called 5 Calls app. Let's get it. 5 Calls. 5, the number 5, and CALLS. That's all you have to do. Go to your Google Store, Play Store, whatever it's called, or go to your iPhone App Store and just put in 5 Calls. It comes up. Click it, download it. Boom, you're ready to go. Simple as that. Make your call. That's all you got to do. Okay, I've been at that for a long time. But you know what, folks? Now it's time to talk about something different. Rather than just hear me run my mouth, I want to tell you a little bit about our guest. Fantastic gentleman. We want to bring him on, but first I want to make sure I don't screw up. I often forget to put the picture up because I got 3 screens around here and I can see the picture up, but I forget that you can't see the picture up. So I'm doing it now. There it is, right? Let's tell you, our guest today is Darold Hamlin. He's a founding partner of the Emerging Technology Consortium. It's a nonprofit. It's a 501c organization. It's basically a group of companies and individuals dedicated to ensuring the benefits of technology, ownership, and new economy jobs, making sure they reach all communities. And before actually starting the ETC, as we call the Emerging Technology Consortium, before he was Chief Operating Officer there, he was also a Chief Information Officer, excuse me, let me get this correct. He was Chief Operating Officer for Logistics Systems, Inc. And he was also a CIO for the city in Philadelphia, and also for the Metropolitan Area Rapid Transit Authority in Atlanta. He was also CIO for them. Fantastic, talented gentleman. He's a retired veteran, retired military officer and a veteran who served as the Chief Technical Officer for the United States Army Reserves, and a professor of military science and departmental chair at the Fordham University in New York City. This gentleman's been getting it done, and he's been out there actually applying that expertise that he's had for a while. He's a Norfolk State University graduate. Woo! HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities. He's also a graduate from Embry Riddle, Aeronautical University, and Fordham University. He's a certified school business official in the states of New York and New Jersey and Connecticut. A little more about the Emerging Technology Consortium accomplishments to date. Here's what they include at ETC. Publishing technology incubator study for the District of Columbia and doing economic partnership with them. They also sponsored an Emerging Technology Opportunity Development Act for the District of Columbia government. Also, they created the HBCU, which is historically Black colleges and university plan for the Toyota North America contingent. And also there's the He was a first round awardee for the Minority Business Development Agency. Also, he had won a broad agency announcement for entrepreneurship and innovation for the HBCU path to sustainability. ETC has been getting a lot of things done. We really do appreciate the work they've done, but that's not it. They've also partnered with the Thurgood Marshall College Fund to establish the HBCU NDAA Advisory Board. You're saying, what is the NDAA Advisory Board? That's the National Defense Authorization Act, which gets signed every year and is responsible for at least 50% of the American annual budget of almost $2 trillion. We're not talking small potatoes, folks. This is significant. And last but not least, he was an advisor to the Congressional Black Caucus and HBCU caucus for the defense issues, which would include the NDAA, of which I just mentioned. And he increased the historically Black college and university and minority serving institutions appropriation. He pushed it up from $20 million a year to $130 million a year. So folks, we've got somebody here who's been getting it done and been getting it done in a major way. So I just want people to understand this guest that we've had on before is very important to small business. And I'm sitting here trying to get my technology right because I want to bring him on the right way. I want to make sure that people get a chance to meet this gentleman. But folks, without further ado, I want to bring to you retired veteran and CEO and just all-around good guy, Darold Hamlin. Folks, here he is. Darold, how are you doing?
Hey, Mark, always a pleasure. It's so great to join you on the show here. So we're just excited.
Soak it in, man. Got to give you a little bit of something. You're a little darker, man. You're not in the witness protection program, are you?
No, I'm not in the witness protection program. Just another happy American today. So looking forward, and I always look forward to our discussions. You know that we normally cannot stop talking after 10 minutes. We average 30 to 45. So today will be a break because we know that we've only got a certain amount of time on the show today. But a lot of good things to cover.
Well, a lot of good things, Darold. I don't know whether or not you can, but listen, we're a show that kind of gets things done as we need to get things done. But you really are a shadow, man. I want people to be able to recognize you, man. I'm not sure you're going to be able to see you. Can you get any more light over you or in front of you?
Yeah, I noticed that. It looks a little dark. Let me see if I can put a little light on the situation.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and take you out the stream and let you work with it for a quick second. Meanwhile, I'll run my mouth. Folks, we're just going to have Darold Hamlin, the Chief Executive Officer for the Emerging Technology Consortium. He's doing his thing, getting the light a little bit better so we could see him. We want people to recognize him on the street and ask him questions. He's sitting back down here, so I'm going to bring him back into the stream. Whoa, that's a lot better.
There you go. Let's go do it, brother.
There we go. How you doing, Darold?
Hey, man, I'm doing great. Great day. I'm up in fact, I'm in Syracuse, New York, and we had almost perfect weather day today. Got to about 78 degrees. We didn't have any smoke from the Canadian fire, so it became a wonderful day.
That's good. Usually people say 78 is kind of hot, but when we've been having 100-degree weather, 78 is cool.
Exactly. No, so it was pleasant up here today, and so this caps my day having an opportunity to talk to you about all the wonderful work that you've been doing and the work that we need to continue to do to make sure this democracy, in fact, benefits all of us. And we certainly, I think we want to make sure that we now start talking about creating wealth and opportunity as opposed to just surviving. So let's get into that.
That's true. That's true, because one of the things, that the Virginia Democratic Small Business Caucus tries to do, it has many constituencies, between African Americans, Latino, woman-owned business, veteran-owned business, LGBTQI-owned businesses. But one of the things that we do try to focus in on is, hey, how can we make sure everyone is benefiting from taxes that they pay into the country and for the services and goods that the United States buys. And I just told people earlier, and I was trying to school them a little bit, saying the National Defense Authorization Act is half of the money that gets spent every year, about $2 trillion. So
exactly,
a lot of people from a governmental standpoint just don't kind of understand, well, how does that affect my life? I mean, I hear you guys talking about the American Rescue Plan, you have all these different things, but how can those large expenditures by the Department of Defense help out small business and help out the different constituencies in small business?
Well, Mark, when we go back and examine how the Small Business Act was created, how our program was created, if you really think about it, it was based on the assumption that there are a bunch of government contracts out there, and if you get yourself certified and qualified, you can get those contracts. Right. Well, there are some flaws in that in terms of, are we doing things that the government really wants to buy? Right. And what the minority community hasn't gotten, that the folks who are doing well, is that they never got the money to build the infrastructure so they actually could do the things the government wants to do.
Well, so give me an example. Give me an example. I mean, I read your resume, and you did a lot of things and working out sort of programs for Toyota North America. You work with a lot of the historically black colleges and universities. So one of the constituencies that we both are in is in the African American constituency of small businesses. How does it affect their historically black colleges and universities? How does that help the community in creating wealth and owning capabilities here in this country, while helping the national defense requirements to be captured and move forward? Tell us, a little bit about that. Explain that.
Well, so let's break it down in two pieces. The first piece that most folks need to understand, that especially the minority community, we think about defense. We think about the young men and women who are in uniform, right? But when you break it down and look at it from a budgetary perspective, last year's budget was $848 billion. The amount of money,
$148 billion with $1 billion.
But when you look at how much money was actually spent on the 848 to pay the troops, the men and women who put their lives on the line, it was only $175 billion.
So basically, I'm just going to round up numbers just to make it easy for people to understand. So basically, out of $900 billion, out of $1 trillion, let's just say it's almost $1 trillion. I know we're talking billions here. You're saying $800 trillion didn't go to anything besides buying services and products, but 200 billion, excuse me, get it right, 800 billion went to buying services and products, and 200 billion went to paying troops and personnel salaries.
That's correct.
So and this is $800 billion went into contractors' pockets.
Exactly. Right. And this is the reason why. When the American fighting man and woman who wants to go to war, we're probably the only army in the world that want to make sure that everything you had at home, you have when you go to war. So you want fresh food, you want water, you want internet connectivity, you want mail, you want all those things. And so when you really look at the defense budget, right, it's really an extraction of America. Everything that we do in the private sector, right, that we have an expectation of American life, we actually provide to our soldiers. And I tell folks, the best example is if you go out on the Anacostia River and look at the marinas adjacent to the Marine Barracks, right, Fort Myers, and Boeing Air Force Base, you'll see marinas. Well, guess whose boats are in those marinas? Military people. And so there's a contract to operate the marina for our soldiers so they can go up and down the Anacostia River between the times they go out and get deployed. And so when you understand that, right, then you start understanding what I say, the military defense industrial complex. What does that mean? That means that everything that the military wants is created by the private sector to support the troops. And if we started looking at that and start requesting our fair share of the contract, specifically now, when we start talking about research and development. And so we have to understand this about the R&D component of the defense industrial base. Only the department and the federal government can spend money to develop a capability that may or may not work. Yet they spend the money anyway because they don't know whether it will work unless they do research on it.
Well, that's with any engineering. I said that's with any engineering project. You don't know what you don't know. That's the reason why you're doing research to try to figure it out.
Right. Except for there are only a small number of companies and a small number of universities that are in that play. And they are getting the lion's share of the money. So, in fact, Congress did a report and said, and I talk about the university because that's where my specialty. But they say there's 650 universities in this country that are certified as research universities. 100 of the 650 get 80% of the money. So 80% of how many dollars? So
roughly
approximately $250 billion that's spent a year.
250
across the federal government, and out of that 250 billion, right, most of that's spent with the Department of Defense.
Okay, so basically, let's just say $225 billion every year is spent with the Department of Defense on research, and out of the 600 and some odd schools, 80% of that money goes to a very small group of schools.
Exactly.
And in that small group of schools, so we're talking $250 billion. Well, how much of the historically Black colleges and universities and minority serving institutions are they getting any of that money? Any significant portion?
Less than 1%.
So you're the expert. Tell us more.
So simply put, if we're interested in equality, if we're interested, too many times I look at, especially the Democrats, they look at trying to control the private sector, yet they control $1 trillion in spending. So maybe if we started focusing on the $1 trillion that we're spending and making sure those dollars are better distributed, it might impact a whole lot of folks.
Well, wait a minute here, Darold. I gotta pop my shirt a little bit. You're talking about the Democrats here, man. This is the Virginia Democratic Small Business Caucus. Are you saying we can do better?
I'm saying we can do a lot better. I'm saying that if we focus on, and we're always trying to do things to make business, pay folks more, do those kind of things, right? And I'm saying if we just focus on how the government spends its money, who it spends its money with, and more importantly, that the rates they pay all contractors, if they were in a narrower band, we'd all be a lot better.
Well, it just seems to me, just trying to say, if we're looking to try to make things more equitable, particularly we're talking about historically Black colleges and universities, minority servicing institutions. You have different groups of communities who are there that if the government is actually spending the department, let me be very specific. If the Department of Defense is spending more money with these particular groups, then you actually have the resources going through those particular universities, which makes those universities skill set. It scales them up to be able to be better at what they do. It also makes sure a lot of the IP or intellectual property that may come out of that, by them being involved with that, they actually can take those things like they do with the SBR or the STTR organizations. They own that intellectual property, and they can actually sell those services to the private sector and back to the government. So, but more importantly, it seems to me that each of these small business constituencies are paying taxes to the federal government, and should at a minimum be getting at least something on par with the percentage of dollars that they actually put into the pie. Are they getting slices of the pie back that are at least going to help them to continue to grow, and that they have a budget that they can depend on as they continue to do work for the greater good of the nation, right? Isn't that kind of how it works?
That's kind of how it works, but that's not the way it works in reality.
Okay.
And so, one of the things that we talked about this is that we need where we are focused on procurement, we need to have an equal focus on how the government actually distributes its money in the very beginning. And that is, we need to understand the difference between legislation and authorization and legislation and appropriation.
And also, can I add one other thing to that? I want to interrupt you, Darold, too much, is that people have to also understand that, what you said, if DoD gets at least half of the budget every year, just so people understand what's going on with the rest of the budget. Are those dollars committed to something else, or what happens, so people can kind of have an idea? Because I said half, right? So
right.
I'm asking you a leading question that I hope you will answer.
No, I'll do my best.
Okay. So if I said half and half of DoD is $1 trillion, they were talking roughly about $2 trillion, which is spent every year by the United States government on everything.
Right.
I mean, that's rounded off numbers, but right.
So what happens to the omnibus bill was 1.7 trillion.
1.7 trillion was the omnibus bill. So what happens to the rest of that money? Is that money available for people to, I mean, if defense has half and there's another 0.7 trillion, what's going on with that? Is it committed dollars?
So what we have to understand is, that's why it's important to understand the difference between authorization and appropriation.
Okay.
So for example, being the old Lockheed Martin man that you are, right? Every time we buy an F-35, right? That's a direct award to Lockheed Martin. So they go from 20 to 25 planes, right? That's 25 planes that only one vendor contractor can produce.
Yeah, there's only one person building those F-35s. There's only one company.
Right.
Yeah.
And I said, how one of the ways we could really solve the small business program, minorities, if we actually had subcontractors on each one of the major end items produced by the Department of Defense, we'd have a whole lot of large minority-owned companies. Okay.
So what do these small companies need to do organizationally so they understand some of the things you talked about in the budget with the authorization and appropriations? Just generally speaking, what do you think small business needs to do to make sure their various different constituencies would be able to make sure that they benefit from the taxes that they pay to the government?
So first of all, we need to have an informed ask, right? And what I mean by informed ask is that I can't, in many cases, you can't bid on a lot of the real work that's being done. So you can't bid and be a subcontractor on the F-35. Because in order to be a subcontractor on the F-35, right, you've got to have a part that goes on the F-35. Well, if you weren't involved in the research and the design and engineering of that part, right, you're not qualified. Right? Now, the fact that the federal government gave them the money to design the F-35, somehow the companies who are already inside tend to forget that, but they want you, right, to come and bring a part. So, oh yeah,
Right.
we'll certainly issue a subcontract. What part of service can you provide me?
Well,
The fact
I
that
would
I've worked with that
say,
plane for 10 years, helped design and create and all that is immaterial to our subcontracting program. Oh, that
well,
the
I
government
can tell
pays
you,
for, by the way.
I can tell you for sure, no parts of Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, any of these other large defense contractors are out there researching and building parts for something that the government does not intend to buy, because they're just wasting their money. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So that's the way the system has evolved, right? Mm-hmm. And as you know, when 60 Minutes did that expose about 6 weeks ago, and they basically said that the defense contractors, right, are basically almost extorting the government. No one ever said anything. Everyone just kind of went back to work the next day. Right? There is an opportunity that if we had the informed ask, right? Mm-hmm. If we just made sure that the Department of Defense just did subcontracting the way it says in the FAR, right? And we actually made them report to Congress not the percentage, but how many dollars did you spend with minority companies, and break them down. How many, they should. And by the way, what many folks don't realize is that they put a addition in the NDAA 2 years ago that would make it an allowable cost if you spent money helping to develop a minority contractor, or spend money to help develop minority students to get the skills they need.
Hold on. Let me stop you for a second. I always try to get people to be specific in their language. And then nothing makes me more irritable when I hear people say minority. I'm like, that means different things to different people. So why don't we be clear? Okay. When we say the term minority, we can say it means a conglomerations of African American, Hispanic. It could be veterans. It could be women. They call all of those groups minority groups. Am I not correct?
You are exactly correct.
The SBA looks at them as all minorities. So if you're an African American and you say, well, and you're speaking very specific, and I'm just going to give you, for example, reparations. You mean reparations means, yes, this is for all that 250, 300 years of free labor that we want money back that you owe us. That's a very clear statement as to what that is. So the analogy that I'm making with you, when you talk about minorities and we talk about small businesses, it doesn't do us any justice if we don't speak very specifically as to what we mean when we say that and what specific programs or groups we're talking about. Not so much that you want to indicate them by race or gender, but by equity going to each particular group. So they just don't get
I think that's
a bunch of political speak. And nobody really knows what that means, okay? But go ahead.
But again, what I'm saying, that's why the language matters, right?
The language matters a whole lot.
We should be using the term minority to our advantage, right? And how do we do that? We simply put targets by category in the legislation. So there is a target for African Americans. There is a target for Hispanics, right? And when you write the appropriations language, right, like we're trying to do with the HBCUs and minority serving institutions, you actually put global or financial targets inside of it that says, okay, we're going to spend $500 million, $250 million goes to HBCU, $150 million goes to Hispanic serving institutions.
Well, the same way they say, 835 billion is going to Lockheed Martin to build this. They specifically tell them this is the contractor, or so and so hundreds of billions of dollars are going to Amazon Web Services to do X. It is very clear in the language as to what they need, what they're going to do. But if you're going to have some sort of equity that helps these, particularly the African American constituency, when we talk about minority institutions, and you don't get into this constant conversation, you've got to be specific in the language. And I like to say that to people because I know you're going to tell me something different. We have this conversation a lot. But when we talk about the Alaska Native corporations, there's specific legislations for ANC in the Federal Acquisition Register that allows them to have up to $20 million no-compete contracts, to have alpha contracting, to have endless numbers of 8A corporations. I don't get into explaining what those are, but that is a law. That is something that is in the FAR. That sort of specific language per group needs to be in there, or we need to be doing those sort of things when it comes to talking about institutions like HBCUs or minority serving institutions or other ones where when you talk research, right?
Exactly. But Mark, again,
research happen in these institutions.
But as we sit here in 2023, right, and we talk about our congressional representation, right? How long has the Native American provision been in the FAR?
For about
and
maybe 15 years. When has anyone
introduced a bill to say, let's do the same thing for African Americans and Hispanics? Right?
Ted
I mean,
Stevens
we're talking
sponsored that bill.
on equity. Huh?
Well, yeah. I think you froze a little bit. I don't know whether you can hear me, but your image froze.
But those are good examples of programs. For example, the Indian Health Service, right? Same thing, right? We have examples of current, specifically targeted minority programs that we should be replicating for the African American community, right? Because it's already in law today.
Well, you can have those sorts of things done for specific communities within small business, with African Americans being one, with historically Black colleges and universities, with Latino. But you need the language to be specific enough and the dollars to be pointed to these institutions to say that you need to have language that says this is not an option. This is what we want, or how we would like our tax dollars to be spent. Because one, we need this STEM capability, or we need this technical capability in artificial intelligence, or hypersonic missiles, or whatever it might be, right? And we want these institutions that have engineering schools and computer science schools and cybersecurity programs to actually be the ones that do the research and deliver in this area for a product that is needed by the federal government, and also capability that is needed as far as personnel coming out with those skill sets. But you can't get something if you don't put anything in. They've got to say, hey, we're not coming with our hat in our hands. We're saying these are our tax dollars. We're simply asking or telling our elected representatives, you need to make sure you're passing laws that invest in these institutions, in these groups. What do you think?
Exactly. And so what it really says, Mark, is, and too often we get very excited when our candidate wins. Right. But I then ask everyone the question, so what's the agenda? What is it that you want them to accomplish after you walk away from the victory party?
Right. What is that?
In many cases, the same thing to me, and I've said this to you.
Right.
We're in the same place halfway through the Biden administration we are in the Obama administration, right? What significant piece of legislation with appropriations has been passed? And in both cases, you had complete control of the executive and the legislative branch, right? But where's the agenda?
Well, let me ask you a question. Let me stop you for a minute, Darold, because I want you to explain to people what's the difference between the legislation and appropriation. Why should small business owners understand the difference between when people say they pass legislation and they say they pass appropriations, so that they understand there's a big difference between the two. I'd like to explain that to folks.
Right. Very simply put, legislation is authorizing language. It says this law that the agency or department should do X, right? But unless you get an appropriation, and an appropriation is a line item in the Authorization Act that says, for example, let's go to your favorite folks at Lockheed Martin. We're going to build 35 F-35s, right, at 275, million, whatever that term is, right? There's actually a line in the legislation, right, that's for that specific thing, right? Appropriation is the legal term for the federal government to move money from legislation to the authorizing agency to execute it. And that's why presidents over the years have wanted to have what? The line item veto, because the only control that Congress has over the executive is the appropriation that says you can only spend this money for, again, the best one most folks remember, right? When President Trump wanted to spend money building the wall, he couldn't build the wall, right? Because there wasn't an appropriation line to build the wall other than the dollars that were appropriated.
Okay,
right?
So I wanted to make sure people understood the programming of this. And this is the Virginia Democratic Small Business Caucus, and small businesses need to understand this on a local, state, and federal level. But we're talking federal now. There's something known as an unfunded mandate, right? So people will, politicians will vote to pass certain legislation, and the legislation goes into law. Like, yeah, it's a law, but when it comes to the appropriation, they don't put any money in it. So if you have a law that says you're supposed to do X, but the appropriation line in the budget is zero, okay, or there's no line at all, then it really doesn't mean anything. They get to talk, say, hey, we passed this law, or we're gonna do all this great stuff, but what in fact is, it's just talk, smoke, and mirrors. There's no money appropriated.
It's a waste of new okie doke.
It's the okie doke, right?
The new okie doke. Hey, we passed this law for you, and they'll come out and have a press conference and wave and all kinds and see what we did.
So really, as a small business, what should you do when they tell you that? What should you ask when a politician says we passed this great law to do X, Y, and Z?
How much
and
money
you're a small business expecting to get some of that business from your tax dollars. What should you ask?
How much of that money is coming to my category of business?
And is the money actually appropriated? And matter of fact, I've become so suspicious in the process now. Where exactly, what page is that appropriation line and what, so I can go look it up and see how much money is actually there.
Right.
And how they're supposed to be spending it. Or that's what we hold our, and if they say yes to all that, then you have something to go talk to your politicians about, right? Now you can say legislation got passed, appropriation got passed. Okay, my company does X. Why aren't we getting any of this business? Right. Somebody can actually do some checking, right? And hold people accountable, right?
And so let's finish up our lesson on how federal money gets sent to selected people.
Well, but Daryl, I have to tell you one thing. It must be getting darker where you're at, because you're slowly fading right back into the
I noticed that.
Program.
How's that?
It's a little better, but go ahead, man. I don't think we're going to get too much better out of you.
So we have authorizing language. We have appropriation, which is actually a line in the legislation that says we're going to give you X number of dollars to do this, right?
Right.
And then we still, and oh joy, earmarks have come back. After a 10-year hiatus, earmarks are back. And you know what an earmark really is? It's a direct award right out of the legislation. So entities actually get money, colleges and universities and companies get money to do X. Right?
So you're telling me in this research program,
it is something that we have not really utilized to its fullest.
I'm not clear. You to make that clear for me. That's about as I'm a newbie. That's about as clear as mud to me. You need to be clearer.
So, for example, and I'll give you the biggest one last year, the University of Alabama and the University of Alabama Birmingham split between them $176 million in earmarks. When the earmark comes to the agency, they just execute a procurement and send a check. There is no bid, there is no procurement, right? There's just instructions on here's what the money is for, and then you have to give a report back to me to say, did you spend the money on this?
So this is for like a research at a university, or what is it for in this case?
Oh, earmarks can go for a number of things. Remember the bridge to nowhere was an earmark, right?
Okay.
There is, there are guidelines on what earmarks can be used for, but the word pork wasn't just made up. There have been earmarks over the years to do a wide variety of things, right? And certainly now we go into advanced Capitol Hill, right? Because as you gain seniority, the more power you have over earmarks and the larger the earmarks that you control.
Well, I want to kind of focus this back in the areas when we're talking about HBCUs and minority serving institutions and different groups. So basically, you're generally talking about earmarks can be done a particular way. But if organizations, for example, you were responsible for helping HBCUs go from 30 million a year to 125 million a year in money that goes to those institutions for research, right?
Right. So that money went into the
when you talk about
research
Alabama,
line.
Okay, I'm sorry, but go ahead. You're talking. I'm interrupting.
Yeah, no, I was just saying that there is a piece of legislation, the HBCU strategies law, that has very specific parameters on what those dollars can be used for. And so by increasing the funding, what we simply did was make more money available for the Department of Defense to achieve the objectives of the HBCU strategies law.
Okay, I got you. An example you were giving with, say, University of Alabama was an example of resources they were getting from the NDAA or the Department of Defense.
So they got that as an earmark. Right. And in that earmark, there is language that says they're going to increase their biomedical research capability. It may even be very specific to selected biomedical research where they would get money to build a building, hire people, get equipment, and all that specified in the earmark.
So the lesson to be learned out of this for small businesses who are working with HBCUs and or minority serving institutions is how do they make sure that they're talking to their representatives to make sure that they're getting opportunities like that in legislation, and then also it happens in appropriation. Right.
So most of your legislators will actually have, you go to them, they'll tell you that there's a place for you to apply for an earmark, right? and you send your earmark request in, and then the earmark then has got to be vetted by the personal staff of the member. Then it goes to the professional staff of the entity that would oversee the distribution of that money. So if it went to defense, it would then go to the defense appropriators, who would then review it and determine, is it viable, and is it something that would be supported? Because in the end, the earmark goes in front of the subcommittee that has jurisdiction over it. It's got to get through that, and then it's got to get and be included in the full bill, not only in the House, but also in the Senate. So now you can see the value of these entities that have government relations firms that can follow this, because you have to follow it just like you follow an appropriation, right? You got to have the infrastructure in order to, so you don't just put in an earmark and then wait for it to come out. You've actually got to work it through the process. And,
wait a minute.
The process
let me stop you.
But it works.
Let me stop you for a second, Daryl. So I just want to make it clear and easy. And as Joe Madison says, I want to put it where the goats can get it, so everybody understands. So an earmark and some money that you like to get the government to spend something on, it's not like going to your local 7-Eleven and buying a lottery ticket and sitting back and just hoping that your number comes through and you get paid. No, you need to have somebody who actually follows that bouncing ball through every place it needs to go to make sure that your ticket's a winner, right? So it's not a matter of guessing. It is a matter of process, is my point. And I wanted to make it in simple language so people understand process-wise. If you're going to get something that you're asking the government to do with the structure and process that's there, then they have to realize, like anything else, from the 25-foot view, it gets passed in the House, it gets passed in the Senate, it goes to conference. They have to basically agree on things. Once it comes out of conference, then they still have to vote on that final legislation in both the House and the Senate. And have I added that correctly? And I kind of left out a lot.
I mean, that's the Cliff Notes version, right? You basically got to get through 4 steps: subcommittee, House and Senate, subcommittee, House and Senate, right? Then through conference. And so why the folks who get government money are good? Because what you pay for is to make sure, because anywhere along the line, right, you can be chopped. And so if you want X number of dollars, you got to have the infrastructure to make sure that you're never chopped until it's signed by the president. But once it's signed into law, then you get your check.
Oh, and this is the problem with small business and smaller organizations, and organizations, even if they're larger, but if they're not organized in a way that can follow that process to make sure that their budget line item makes it through all of these wickets. So in the end, when the president signs that bill into law, that you're going to get the resources that were promised to you. Right. Now, so how do you get better at that? Because a lot of times, you're telling small businesses, hey, you got the 8A program, you got the Small Business Administration, you can go to all these different places to show you how you get business from the government and all this. But you're basically going through all of these wickets and all of these hurdles as some mom and pop shop against a behemoth, okay, trying to get, you may spend 5 years and only out of your efforts in 5 years is, getting maybe a $500,000 contract if you get that. So, so when we're talking to small business, and a lot of people get fed up with the process because they're saying, I just can't compete. I can't compete against Lockheed Martin, which, I love Lockheed. I worked for them for 20 years, great organization, but they got a lot of stuff they need to fix too. But we're not talking about Lockheed. We're talking about small business. And how do we make sure small business and all of these small business constituencies have a process that they can follow in order to make sure that there is actual business and resources at the end of the rainbow going through all those wickets. It's very difficult to explain that to people. But go ahead.
Well, and Mark, here's why I say we got to use just like the HBCUs, right? The one thing that to me that would make the big difference today is if we got the SBA actually to start managing contracts again, right?
The SBA, or so the SBA, in 1942, we know that the Congress creates what I know some notes you had. What is it? The Defense Production Act of 1950. Talk a little bit about that and what the SBA used to do, who started it. I mean, give me a Cliff Notes version of this that the audience can sort of grab onto.
When they started the SBA, they actually had contracts that went to the SBA that they administered. And they were the ones that made sure that they went to the proper category of business and they would submit the report, right? And then there was a lawsuit and so once that lawsuit, and I know the one about HBCUs, I'm not as familiar with the one on small business, but every time we try to get these carve outs, right, and the big businesses, right, because they are who they are, will always try to go out and make sure that it's as difficult as possible for the small businesses. Well, I think the challenge is that's why what we have to do then is just as now when the Biden administration has set that $100 billion goal, the first thing small businesses, well, who's going to administer these contracts? Who's going to make sure that small and minority businesses actually get it? And for whatever reason, we've never got those contracts back to the SBA to administer. So there'd be some of the best interest in developing small and minority business.
Well, I guess if they got you busy worrying about if you're an African American, burdensome college loans, if you're worried about not getting, if you're worried about driving while black, not getting shot, along with the other regular worries of life that everyone else has, you can see how this can get kind of complicated, right? And if you're worried about basic voting rights. So I try to tell people, you know what? We're going to have to deal with all these things anyway. When you just talk about it from an African-American perspective. But let's talk about it from an American perspective. What makes all these things better for small business? And I think having knowledge of the process and building a process so the resources that are the tax dollars that people pay into the federal government actually have a way of equitably coming out to these various different communities so that they can change what's going on economically in their lives. I don't know. What do you feel about that?
I think we've got to start looking, we've got to understand the process. And that is, we don't hold our elected officials, nor do we hold folks when they get appointed to high positions, right, to do anything for the community.
Right.
And I'll say, is now we have a black Secretary of Defense, Chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff. What are they doing different with minority businesses that wasn't done before them?
Good question.
Right.
And for that question, Darold, I think we've had another great conversation.
And I think that's a good place to leave it off and start the next time. But Mark, it's always a pleasure. We're going to get this thing done. I think we've got to look at it through a different lens.
Yeah.
And that we've got to start asking different questions and making sure that all of us have something to do to contribute to moving our business and communities forward.
Well, Darold, as always, man, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. I just want to thank you for being on the Virginia Democratic Small Business Talking Show. We love having you, man. We clap you in and we clap you out.
Brother, always a pleasure.
Love hearing from you, man. You have a way of making it, putting it right there where people can understand it, okay?
Hey, we'll continue to work that.
Appreciate you being here. And I'll see you next time on the Virginia Democratic Small Business Caucus Show live. And thank you, Darold Hamlin with the Emerging Technology Consortium. Keep doing what you do. See you later, brother.
All right, brother.